Entitled neighbor from hell, kept blocking my driveway and harassing me. Welcome to /regrets, like and subscribe for more Reddit stories, enjoy. He harassed me for years, he blocked my driveway, used my trash and even stole my property. I had dreamed of buying a home for years, escaping the endless cycle of noisy apartments and disrespectful landlords. After countless extra shifts, skipped vacations, and careful budgeting, I finally got the keys to a modest house on a quiet cul-de-sac. The street was lined with old trees, the neighbors seemed friendly, and the air smelled like fresh grass and possibility. For the first few weeks, life was peaceful. I unpacked boxes slowly, carefully arranged my furniture, and planted flowers in the front garden. I loved sitting on my porch in the morning, sipping coffee, listening to birds sing. It felt like my own little sanctuary. Then, the new neighbor arrived. He moved in with a spectacle of vehicles, a lifted truck so loud it echoed through the neighborhood, a beat-up motorcycle, and a vintage Mustang that he loudly revved every time he pulled out. He barely acknowledged anyone. On his first morning, he parked his truck diagonally across both our driveways, blocking mine partially. When I politely knocked on his door to ask if he could park properly, he opened the door, smirked, and said, "It's a public street, lady. You'll manage." I felt stunned. But I told myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just careless. In the following days, his stuff began creeping over to my side of the fence, buckets, broken tools, a tangled mess of cables. When I moved them back, he just threw them right back over the fence with a smirk. One afternoon, I caught him washing his motorcycle with my garden hose, leaving the water running and flooding my flower beds. I confronted him, explaining the damage it caused. He shrugged and said, "It's just plants. They'll grow back." That casual disrespect stung. I began keeping notes, snapping photos, recording dates. I started noticing his dog, a massive beast, chained outside all day, barking at anything and everything. I asked if he could bring it inside during the night or quiet it down. He laughed and said, "Dogs bark. That's what they do. Get earplugs if you don't like it." Sleep became a luxury. The barking, combined with his booming stereo on weekends, made peaceful nights impossible. The music was so loud I could feel the bass in my chest. I called the police multiple times. Each time they arrived, he'd turn down the volume just enough to avoid fines, then crank it right back up after they left. One evening, fed up, I posted a polite note on his door asking for consideration during the night. The next morning, I found the note ripped up, replaced by a crude graffiti saying "Karen Alert" with an arrow pointing to my house. The neighborhood was divided. Some neighbors were sympathetic, others wary, unwilling to get involved. I felt isolated, frustrated, and exhausted. After that graffiti incident, things only got worse. The welcome to the neighborhood feeling was long gone. I noticed more things creeping into my yard: trash bags, a lawn chair, even a broken umbrella. Once, I found an old tire leaning against my flower bed, smeared with mud. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said, "That's just art, sweetheart. Adds character." He began parking his vehicles recklessly. His truck often blocked not just my driveway but the neighbor's mailbox, making it hard for deliveries and mail. One time, his motorcycle was parked so close to my car that I barely squeezed past. One weekend, I woke up to the smell of smoke. I looked outside and saw him having a barbecue on my driveway. Chairs, grill, and all his friends. They were loud, smoking, spilling drinks on my walkway, and trash littered the steps. When I asked him to move it, he shrugged and said, "It's your driveway? Didn't know." Frustrated, I started recording everything meticulously: dates, photos, videos, even audio recordings of the parties and his loud insults. He started calling me sweetheart in a condescending tone every time I confronted him, as if to mock me. He seemed to enjoy pushing boundaries. One day, I found a giant laminated sign nailed to the fence, right on my side. It said, "Whiny neighbor zone, caution, may cry without warning." It had a sad cartoon face with tears. I was humiliated. Several neighbors passed by, smirking. I took it down immediately, but the next day, it was back, even bigger. I called the HOA to complain. They said they'd send a warning. The next week, the sign disappeared. But the damage was done. His backyard parties got worse. People started parking on the street illegally, blocking my driveway, yelling and fighting. I called the police again. This time, they left a warning ticket. The dog? Still barking all day, every day. My sleep was shattered, my anxiety rising. I had trouble concentrating at work. My friends noticed I was always tired and stressed. I hired a surveyor to officially measure the property lines. The results were crystal clear. His shed was encroaching 2.3 feet onto my yard. No permits, no inspections, nothing. I felt a mix of relief and anger bubbling up inside me. Finally, solid proof I could use to fight back and reclaim what was mine. Next, I found a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and explained my situation. She laid out the process: file a formal complaint, seek a court order to have the shed removed, and demand compensation for damages and legal fees. The paperwork was overwhelming, confusing at times, but my determination kept me pushing forward. Meanwhile, the neighbor showed no signs of backing down. Instead, he ramped up the provocations. He'd sit on his porch, cigarette in hand, yelling insults over the fence. "Whiny neighbor strikes again," he'd shout, or mockingly call me sweetheart in the cruelest tone possible. His friends would gather and laugh every time I walked by, making me feel isolated and helpless. One afternoon, I discovered an even more brazen form of harassment: a massive billboard-sized version of the infamous "Whiny Neighbor Zone" sign, nailed right onto the fence facing the street so everyone in the neighborhood could see it. My cheeks burned with humiliation, but deep inside, I felt a spark. This sign would be key evidence in my fight. Determined, I filed formal complaints with both the city and the HOA. I attached every piece of evidence I had: photos, videos, the survey report, noise logs, and police reports. City inspectors came out and confirmed the shed was illegal, violating several codes. They issued fines and gave him a strict deadline to remove the structure. But of course, he refused. Instead of removing it, he went further, adding a makeshift roof extension that spilled even further into my property. I captured it all on video and sent constant updates to the city. The fines kept stacking, growing larger and more severe. The tension in the neighborhood grew. Some neighbors who'd once been indifferent now offered words of support. Others whispered behind curtains, afraid to confront him but glad someone was standing up. The court date finally arrived. Nervous but prepared, I stepped inside the courtroom with my lawyer. I laid out months of evidence: photos of the shed encroachment, audio recordings of his endless parties, statements from neighbors who had witnessed his reckless behavior, and the official survey report. The judge listened intently. Across from me, he sat smirking, arms folded, trying to intimidate with his bravado. But the judge wasn't fooled. The ruling came down: he had to dismantle the shed immediately, pay my legal fees, and strictly adhere to noise regulations. Relief flooded through me. Yet, he refused to comply once more. Taking to social media, he painted himself as the victim, a neighbor bullying campaign target, a man oppressed by government harassment. But his posts backfired spectacularly. Neighbors came forward, sharing their own stories and evidence, exposing him as the true problem. That period was exhausting: the waiting, the constant battles, the emotional roller coaster. But with every small victory, I felt stronger and more resolved. I wasn't just fighting for my property, I was fighting for my sanity and peace. When he ignored the court order for the second time, I didn't hesitate to hire a licensed demolition crew. I scheduled the date, notified the police to oversee everything, and made sure the entire process was legal and safe. On demolition day, he showed up furious, trying to block the workers. He yelled that this was abuse, that I was using the system to ruin his life. He filmed everything with his phone, desperate for online sympathy. But the officers stood their ground. The crew dismantled the shed, piece by piece. I watched from my porch, feeling a mix of triumph and relief. Meanwhile, inspections continued. The city discovered he was illegally repairing cars in his backyard and dumping oil and toxic substances on the ground, an environmental violation. Animal control responded to complaints about his dog's terrible condition, malnourished, chained in the heat for hours. They seized the animal and relocated it to a safer home. I also sent evidence to the IRS after finding videos of him bragging about dodging taxes by working cash only. The investigation kicked off swiftly. The HOA began issuing heavy fines, restricting his use of common areas and threatening legal action. His possessions started getting seized, and fines piled up. Finally, after months of pressure, he packed up and disappeared. No goodbyes, no confrontations, just silence and an empty lot. I hung the whiny neighbor zone sign he'd humiliated me with inside my garage, now a trophy of my victory. I took a photo and posted it with the caption, "Some neighbors just don't get the memo. Peace at last. Now, my garden blooms in quiet. Mornings are calm, the air is fresh. Every time I look at that sign, I remember that standing up for what's yours is worth every sacrifice." So what you think? What was your favorite part? Share, like and subscribe for more stories. Bye bye.